everybody. This is the second webinar for the Business Action Group, and I'm so happy that Tamsin Woolley-Barker is able to be with us. Hello, Tamsin.
Hello.
And we're going to begin with Ashley, just a few minutes of instructions as to how our audience can contribute their need to mute their mics and so on and so forth. So Ashley, do you want to get us going?
Yep. Hey everybody, if you could please have your mics muted while Tamsin gives her presentation, that would be great. It cuts out all background noise. And sometimes there are very strange echoes that occur through other people's mics and sound systems on their computers. And after Tamsin's finished with her presentation, she will open up the floor for questions. You can ask questions either by unmuting your mic and speaking your question, or if you're in a position where you would rather not speak or you can't speak, feel free to type in the chat box. It's located on the GoToMeeting control panel at the very bottom. If for some reason you want to interject something during her presentation, we ask that you also submit that in the chat box rather than speaking. David and I will be keeping an eye on the chat box. As always, these webinars are recorded, and I will send a copy of the webinar and Tamsin's slides on Monday morning.
Awesome, so great. Okay, well, Tamsin, get us going here.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, it's a little earlier for me because I'm in San Diego. And I am super excited about this group, just to see the progress being made on taking these really theoretical ideas that, that I learned for all this time, and then, applying them to actual real life situations is really exciting. And I've just been enjoying the road, and not only that, but I'm seeing a real hunger with other companies for this kind of information. So I started out with this slide, and it seemed like the ultimate teamwork slide here, but I probably wouldn't use this for a mainstream audience now that I think about it, because people are opposed to larvae. I have no idea why. Anyway, we're going to be talking about evolving more adaptive, resilient, regenerative companies using evolutionary principles. So my background, just to give you a little bit of my background, I've spent the last 3 decades studying population genetics. So I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, and I actually worked with Robert Trivers, who you could consider one of the fathers of sociobiology.
Right.
And then, and so that got me really interested in social structure and behavior and speciation and all those kinds of things. So I studied human evolution at NYU. I studied whale demographics. I studied baboons and all kinds of primates. But then I got more into the social insects and all kinds of other things. So I have this broad knowledge of evolutionary processes. And then over time, I got more interested in this new subject of biomimicry, which is, it's really the art and science of innovation inspired by nature. So, and typically, I love this quote from Janine Benyus, who wrote the book, but the idea is that, after hundreds of millions of years, only the survivors are left. So they all have good ideas on how to do things that have survived the test of time. And so what can we learn from them? And I just got so excited about this because I have a design background as well, and it just brought everything together for me. And the answers are all around us, and I love to hike and be outdoors, and so you can see all these great ideas. And even Fortune magazine said it was the #1 trend in business this year. But what we find is, and I've worked with all these different companies doing this, and so what we're doing really is on the product level. So companies come and they say, well, we want a package that is, more biodegradable, or we want, a tooth product that remineralizes teeth, or something like that, usually a product. And then we look at what species are doing that, and then we extract the principles, and then we try to ideate with their engineers around inventing new things. So it's really fun. It's always exciting. You come up with all these fantastic ideas. Everybody's mind's blown. It's so cool. But what happens, I've found, is that when you go check back in with them 6 months, a year later, nothing's happened. And the engineers are disengaged and frustrated because their organizations were never designed to accept those kinds of changes. So I became very frustrated with that, and I realized that, you know, we can show people the coolest things, but they're not going to go anywhere because these organizations just aren't designed to adapt to change. So I wrote this book. That's my book, Teaming, and it just goes through a vast amount of different kinds of scenarios in business and how we can learn from these other ancient societies and how they do it. So here's the problem. Everybody hates their job, which is just what a miserable thing we've done to ourselves. This 70% of workers are disengaged from their work, which is really tragic because we spend 60% of our time there. But it has bigger effects. The companies themselves fail to adapt to change because they're not relying on the information from the front lines of the individuals that are actually on the front lines. And so suddenly mysterious things that, you know, they didn't see coming happen to them, like Kodak going under. And then even bigger systemic effects that come. Winter's coming. We live in this VUCA world, and I know I looked at Adam Henson's webinar from last week, and I use this VUCA concept all the time of it being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, and we're just not equipped to do it. And I think the reason is really those first principles of individuals are disengaged from any kind of power in their lives to make change. You know, we all look at this and we go, oh, someone should do something, but we're the someone. And we just don't have the structure to make our effects known. So what I've been doing is working with all kinds of companies, and these are all CEOs, like big shot CEOs. I have them running around outside and looking at different natural artifacts, looking for the patterns, and I take them out in the woods, I take them out in the desert, and on these great hikes, and it really blows their mind, and they come back thinking in some different ways. So of course, Darwin said it best, as always. It's the species that are most responsive to change, and that's what we need to inculcate in our business approach. What survives the test of time? Is it these coral reefs, or is it our structures? Is it this? This is actually my hometown. Last year, we had incredible rains. Everything flooded. It was a mess. Or this. And, what's the difference between these two things? And it's really the difference between a machine and a living thing. So when this is kind of a famous tropism now in business circles, is that every time the city grows in size, the innovation and productivity go up, but in a company, as it gets bigger, the productivity goes down. So, what is the difference? And the difference is, of course, that a city is kind of an organic, emergent thing that, whereas a company is designed from the top down, rigidly, like a machine. And so living things grow and adapt, and machines don't. I love that picture. Nature wins. So the thing is, we're designing our companies like machines, and that has a lot of problems. They require big central processors, big administration, and the cogs, that's us, we're disengaged. And every time something's not working, the whole company has to be restructured. People need to be replaced or repaired. I'm not sure how you repair a person. But when conditions change, it doesn't naturally adapt and respond. It has to be done by someone else. And of course, it's susceptible to destruction by one-man starships. So we want to avoid that. And then the other thing is our organizations are so hierarchical. And the irony is that nature uses hierarchies to prevent change from happening. So, you know, the immune system is constantly searching for things that don't belong. You know, if we have cancerous cells in our body, which are arising all the time, our body has a hierarchical system to get rid of them. So hierarchies are really designed to prevent change. And that is not what we want in a company where conditions are changing all the time. And of course, management is expensive and really irritating. Just the bureaucracy, people are just really disengaged and frustrated. So what might this look like? What could it look like? And I think we'd all agree that these adaptive living systems, like the coral reef and the rainforest, are the best examples that we have of what a sustainable world would look like and perform. And look how rich it is, and varied, and all kinds of relationships, all kinds of opportunities. And I think that's what, you know, we'd ideally like to see more of in our business settings. So I thought about this a lot. I've gone through a lot of different ways of looking at this, but what I've really come to is it comes down to looking at, I've kind of come to a systems theory kind of approach where it begins with our diversity, our individuality, and knowing what we contribute, and then connecting from the bottom up. These things grow from the bottom up, and then they have surprising emergent properties, like the brain. So cool. I mean, one neuron can't really do very much, but connecting them creates this emergent system with far more power than we ever could have guessed that single neurons have. And so I started looking at it from the real biomimicry perspective and thinking, well, how do these other more ancient successful teams work to create lasting value? I mean, fungus aren't sitting in, don't worry about the Pacific garbage patch, and the ants aren't sitting in traffic, and they seem to have figured it out. So let's see what they're doing. So, and the main thing is that I think that these diverse and independent individuals are connecting into these networks, these flat networks that are constantly responding to changing conditions everywhere it occurs. So what if your company was more like a slime mold? And I love you asking these CEOs that, because first off, they're like, well, we're full of slime. I don't know. I usually get some nasty comments about upper management at this point. But but sometimes I play a video of the slime mold going through the forest and searching and eat. But these are all individuals searching separately. And then when conditions are scarce, they come together and they form these connected networks where they're sharing the resources they get, but they're all independently searching for what they need. They adapt to change quickly without top-down oversight. They're resilient. They innovate instantly. They grow without restructuring, and they never have a meeting or a management expense or an annual review. There's no corruption and there's no paperwork. I suppose there's probably parasites, but that's another matter. So they grow from the bottom up. There's no brains and there's no meetings. And I don't know how many of you have, a lot of experience working in companies, but people hate their meetings, and the higher up they get, the more of their time is spent in meetings. And it's really a function of that hierarchy where all the report lines converge on the top, and they don't get to do much of anything else. So they find this very exciting, which I think is hilarious. And ants, ancient teams, they've been working this way maybe 125 million years. And then the termites have been doing it for 250 million years. And so what if we worked more like ants? And the first thing people tell me when I bring this up is like, well, but that's a clone army. Who wants to be an ant? And that's really a Hollywood, conception that we have. I mean, they all look alike to us, I guess. But it turns out my friend is a Russian researcher, Olga Bogatyreeva. She painted all their backs in different colors with codes and recorded them. She did this over 20 years with 12 different ant colonies, many different species. And she found that no two ants are statistically alike in their behavior. So they're all even more different from one another than we are, which is mind-boggling. And even to the point where she could identify an individual ant by just its behavior. And she gave them all Russian names. So she was like, oh, there goes Kropotkin. Hey, what's Stalin worked up over there? I thought that was great. But what if you believe that your work made a difference in the world and you could choose who you worked with and you did whatever you thought was best in the moment and you had all the information you needed to make good decisions and you felt like your perspective was heard and seen and valued? I mean, wouldn't that make you a more engaged employee? So I think if we can take care of these things from the bottom up, we can have more effective, richer systems with better outcomes. So, and then this is really the ultimate, these fungal networks. And they're underground and they're everywhere, evolving for at least 500 million years. And I recently read 2.5 billion. I don't know if that's true. That seems crazy, but I would believe it. And it's a quarter of all terrestrial biomass. It supports every ecosystem, utterly resilient and responsive to change. Many of these networks are as close to immortal as a living thing gets. Some of them are 9,000 years old. And there's still a network of individuals. They're not genetic clones. They're similar, but they still are diverse. And I think, to me, the exciting thing comes to see the convergence of good ideas evolving again and again. And here at the top is a map of the internet. And you can see how similar that is. And really, I feel that we're getting to a point where we can tap these kinds of more advanced networking tools to unlock some of the value that these other species have gotten for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. So it's very exciting. Just to give you a little idea, is what we're calling regenerative practices, business practices. And so here you can see these termite mounds in the background here. And what they do, the termite, this is just their air conditioner. The termites live underground. But every night they come out and they collect all these little scraps. And each scrap is pretty much worthless, just a little twig or a leaf. And they bring it back down into the mound and they chew it up into this compost and feed it to their fungal gardens underground. And in much the same way that the leafcutter ants do. But what happens over time is it enriches the soil, and that grows more grass, and that draws herbivores, and their droppings enrich the soil. And then carnivores come, and then they leave the carcasses around, and that enriches the soil. So you get this progressively regenerative, richer environment for all kinds of species. And it just gets richer from one generation to the next. So I think that is sort of the model that I have in mind of the workers doing small things that accumulate into value that we would not predict. And so we want to apply to business. And how do we achieve this evolutionary transformation? These little mud skippers. Nothing represents transformation like a mud skipper. So I wrote this book, frustrated with all this, and just looking at the deep and proven patterns that you see in all these different species and how they collaborate, what's behind the magic that they've got. So I came up with these kind of 5 general processes that are going on, and trying to translate them into something that an executive can process, because there's something about talking to a very important executive person about slime molds that kind of just makes them glaze over. So I try to keep it a little more applicable. I'm just going to kind of gloss over this stuff, but it's actually the meat of the book. It's really vast because it affects every single aspect. But this collective intelligence and swarm creativity is really an emergent property of these diverse individuals connecting and collaborating together. So they don't have any central management, so that's pretty cheap to run a company that way. And they rely on the wisdom of the crowd. So, and that only works if everyone's diverse and independent. And so they have a lot of mechanisms for ensuring that that's the case. And then they form these small modular teams that adapt to change all the time. So every team is responding to things locally, in real time. So it's, you can see it's very adaptive and very responsive and very local. The classic example is the honeybee waggle dance, which you may or may not be familiar with. But when the honeybees need to find a new home, all the scouts will go out in different directions and look for a home. And then when they find something they like, they come back and they'll do this dance, showing all the other scouts about where it is, how good it is, how far, all these things. And then if another bee is convinced that it's worth checking out, she'll go and check it out. And then she'll come back and do the same dance if she likes it. So the good ideas amplify. And then finally, there's a tipping point where they all say, okay, that's enough. They all go. So it's this kind of collective decision-making that's based on the diverse opinions and this competition of ideas. And it's a very typical kind of way of working in these superorganism colonies. And you see the same thing in the ants when you see these pheromone trails. It's a similar process. But so this, both things, collective intelligence and swarm creativity. And swarm creativity really just refers to the problem-solving aspects of how do you come up with new ideas, how do they spread, how do we decide what innovative thing to do together, those kinds of things. But it really works on the same kind of principles. Self-organization, bottom-up connectivity, these well-established communication arenas, and then things like simple rules and feedback loops and tipping points. But the basis of all of this, the really most fundamental thing, is the maintenance of diversity and independence. And when I say diversity, you know, I mean, we immediately think about these categories. Oh, make sure you have one of every color, make sure you have one of every sexual orientation, you know, that sort of thinking. But that's not what the ants are doing at all. They're going by diversity of experience, diversity of personality, diversity of style. And, you know, the reality is that all of us are unique. And the same is true for the ants. So I think we need to shift our kind of understanding of diversity to really unlock the power in this kind of model. So because diversity, as you know, as evolutionary aficionados, it's the raw feedstock of adaptation. So if you don't have diversity, that's the limiting factor on how much you can change. So I'm always trying to stress that to companies because that's really the key. And the most important thing there is creating a culture that will allow that to take place, because we all know that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's the most important thing. And I like, what's that?
If I could, getting a bit of an echo. Could you go back to that last slide and just explain what you mean by that?
Well, it's like culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what I mean by that is that if you can set up a culture that values those diverse contributions and these kinds of collective intelligence and swarm creativity processes, which do take a lot of trust. So you have to have a framework of mutual trust. You have to have a framework that supports this. You can't just magically wish it to be. And so the culture is really what holds it together.
Okay, great.
And I like this quote. This Peter Glor, I don't know if you know him, but he's not a biologist at all. He's a organizational designer, really, working in high tech. And but he really nailed exactly where I got to looking at these superorganism species. from a totally different perspective. So I think that he kind of nailed it. It's really about this, the self-organization and the diversity and transparency, and then peer recognition, good communication, and the networks themselves are critical, and then this trust that makes it all work. So that really is, I think, the if we can nurture a culture that respects individual diversity and connection, we might have a shot at this. So, and a culture starts at the top, of course. But the interesting thing is when you look at leadership in all these other species, it really doesn't look anything like us. And the interesting thing is that 1 out of 3 honeybees and ants performs a leadership role. So leadership is important, but it's very different than what we see in our own companies. So, and their main tasks are to sample the local information and to distill it into patterns, and then they share that with the team and then leaders of other teams. And it's really, these leaders perform the function of spreading the big picture. So they cultivate diversity and independence, as we'll see. They mediate conflict. They spread social identity. You know, the queen bee is spreading her pheromones that unite the colony. And of course, she provides the compelling shared purpose, which is making more offspring for the future. So leaning in, this is a nuptial flight. So I think these are ants. But they, you know, they do their nuptial flight. They all take flight at the same time, all the virgin queens, all the drones, and they mate. And so these virgin queens, their first and most important job is to collect as much diversity as they can. So they will spend days mating with as many males as they can, because they need that certain amount of diverse sperm that's going to get them through the producing offspring for the rest of their lives. But they need the diversity in order to have all these other effects within the colony, which gives leaning in a whole new meaning. I'm not sure that that Cheryl would like that, but we'll see. And so again, it's this distributed leadership concept of like 1 in 3 ants and bees X are the leader. And every team contains every function. So you don't have an outside administrative team. You don't have an outside sales team. Everything's contained within each team. And each team is dedicated to a customer or a concept. So, and these teams can zip and zip on the fly to take care of whatever's going on. So I really, I have all kinds of modules and action steps that I work with these companies on, but it's really come down to this first principles kind of concept of helping people know their uniqueness. And that's true for the company too. I do a lot of essence work with companies, like, what do you really want? What's your mission really? What's your unique essence really? And then drilling down into what they want to accomplish, getting them excited and believing that it could actually be true. It could actually do these things. And then helping them connect, encouraging their autonomy and initiative, and then cultivating a whole culture that values that diversity and experimentation, which is, of course, the evolutionary variance and selection that Adam was talking about. And then just developing an ability to think in systems and not so linearly, not so siloed, because we really have to think that way in every element of our lives, and it's really not serving us. The other thing is that I just feel like humans were made for change. You know, we're really designed for it. We love to make things and solve problems. And if we just restructure the way we work, I think we can do so much more, and people would be so much more engaged. Companies would profit, and then we get greater emergent effects on our economies, our societies, and on the environment. So I put this out, you know, when I work with my CEOs. I'm actually working with Google right now. So, and they love this stuff. They love it. So what can superorganism logic do for you? And it's taking off because, and part of the reason is it's so natural to us, you know, because we're superorganisms as well. So we like to work this way. We like to be free to do what we think we should do. And then the mechanisms of pure accountability keep us on track. And we have a lot of different processes that really support this kind of effect. So thank you. It's kind of a broad overview. If you've seen the book, it's very vast and deep and goes into all kinds of things. But this is the overview of what I've been doing. Companies love it. They're really ready, which has been very exciting. So I'll turn it back. Yeah.
So that was great, Tamsin. So great. And I've got a million questions, but I know others do too.
Okay.
Marcel and Adam have both typed questions, but I wonder if they want to chime in, maybe unmute their mics, and I can read what they typed, but they can also just ask the questions on their own. So Marcel, do you want to kick it off? I'm not hearing, so let's see. Marcella, could you unmute your mic?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Tamsin, thanks for this presentation. It was really interesting, and I've added your book to my list here. So.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Couple questions. I'll just start. So you mentioned Google. So are there any other organizations that you've worked with that have really embraced this and have spent significant effort on implementing at least some of the aspects of it?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to this this one. Let's see. Yeah, all of these companies have used it. In fact, Dassault Systems, I mean, they are a real, they're not a tree hugging company, but they were like, we just are not able to adapt to change on the scale that we're at because we're a global company. And so they've been really welcoming it. Google is starting a new department that's called, it's part of the people dev, but it's specifically oriented towards working with experts on biological teamwork models. So I think that's me. So we're super excited about that. Let's see, Kimberly Clark hired a biomimic on staff because they love this. Let's see, who else? Estee Lauder's done a lot of work, but that's on the product side. And Johnson & Johnson did some nice work with this. Yeah, and I don't have this on here, but there's a group called Waggle, W-A-G-G-L, and they got really into the Waggle dance thing, and I've kind of turned into their spokesperson. But it's amazing how much interest there is across the board, and even like NASA is coming to me because they all know they need to change, and it's not working. And then in Silicon Valley, they're losing. It's hard for them to retain talent. So they're thinking if they can unleash more people's innovation and happiness, they can get better results.
Okay, so Adam, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hey, Tamsin, this is fantastic. And when I saw that you were going to be our next speaker, I went out immediately to get your book and am enjoying it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I made the comment, I kind of joke on the Drucker quote about culture, is that that's only one meal out of 3 a day, so I think he understates it. Culture eats strategy continuously. And as a younger guy, on the client side, I put in really spiffy, stage gate new product development systems in 3 different companies, including the last one I was in on the client side, which was Mars, the candy company.
Mm-hmm.
And my belief earlier was that, if you get the process right, that people will just kind of, be somewhat in awe of its beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And will, of course, start doing it, and then you get older and you get real. You find out how the world actually operates. So to this notion of culture, and then the idea that I like to torture the aphorism that everybody wants to go to heaven, no one wants to die. Everyone wants to go to innovation heaven, but no one wants to die to the old ways of organizing, to old intuitions. And Dan Coyle's new book, The Culture Code, talks about some great research where they did an innovation challenge with two different groups of people. One was a group of MBA students, and the other group was kindergartners.
Oh.
and you assume, and it was a fairly complex challenge, and they had certain constraints, but it's how to build the tallest structure given tape, I think a ping pong ball, some wires, etc. And we, of course, he leads us down the primrose path of thinking that, of course, the MBA students are going to win it. And they didn't, because the kindergartners don't have status concerns yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not spending their time, so much of their cognitive output isn't tied up with how do I look, and am I making the right contributions, and am I making enough contributions, and all these things. And kindergartners just kind of get in there and they're just shoulder to shoulder, and they're trying things. And it kind of, it really, I think, makes your point well, that they just get in there. They're not, no one's really looking for a leader. No one's trying to figure out whether, what their role is, whatever. And so this is a very long way of just asking, how do you help in this type of work? How do you help adults get past some of those status concerns, have a little bit of awareness of their own intuitions in regard to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my typical process getting into these companies is I give them a gee whiz kind of lunch and learn, and I stick to the product side. And they go, wow, I could make a tape that works like gecko feet. I want that. And they get really inspired, but the reality is I already know that they're never going to do it.
Yeah.
But they bring me back, and then I say, well, if you were organized differently, you could do more of these things. But the nice thing about this is that it can kind of start anywhere. Like, you don't need a high-end a missive from on high to do it. You can just implement it with individuals at any level of the company. So
yeah.
That's nice. But the problem that you do run into is you have to be careful with the people in power, because they're threatened by it. And so you have to, right off the get-go, find a new way for them to contribute so they're not threatened.
Yeah, we usually try to, we're pretty kind of naked about our aspirations in that regard, and we'll always co-opt the most senior person on a project.
Mm-hmm.
and pull them aside early and just say, look, people will be watching what you're doing. More than ever, please be aware of your behavior. Please model that the exercise isn't here to come up with the most tepid variations of whatever you offer up.
Right.
And that we really do need, just great pieces in this presentation talking about, the importance of diversity and really getting that stretch and everything. And so what kind of the next challenge for us, I think, is to make sure that all that great experience that we can control while they're with us in our facility and on the project, that somehow that they're able to recreate that when they get back to the ranch, and that they don't immediately lapse back into those old behaviors and those old intuitions.
Right. In fact, we usually now at this point, because I work with a group called Regenesis. I don't know if you know them, but
no, I don't.
Carol Sanford, and they worked with Procter & Gamble in the 60s, so they kind of pioneered a lot of this stuff. But they refuse to do any kind of engagement unless it's around an actual work project. So because they're like, we need to implement this right away, otherwise you won't understand it. Like, you just need to start doing it. And so that kind of works. But a lot of times I can find ways, like okay, on this particular 3-hour workshop, we're going to implement these structures so you can see how you would do it back home. It seems like everybody seems to like it, and the nice thing is it really transcends any kind of political boundaries. It's people like to be free and do their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they like to make things together, you know, and make change and make something significant.
Let me, I'm eager to jump into the conversation here, but Adam, stay on, all of you stay on. So there's so much to like about what you said, Tamsin, and I see a lot of convergence between your talk and Adam's talk, and also what we're trying to do with pro-social. I think there's a narrative end of things as to how do you excite and inspire and engage a company and a CEO, and you seem to have done that really well, although you say that there's some things that don't work so well. So there's kind of you might say there's an art to that.
There is.
But there's also a science to it that I want to get to.
Okay.
And I want to make a point which I'll elaborate on as we continue. So the nice thing about this group is that it's an ongoing conversation. But when we use biological metaphors, such as ecosystems and ant colonies and so on, I think we have to realize that nature often goes in directions that we don't want to emulate.
Oh, right.
That's true for many animal societies. They're despotic. They're not at all like social insect colonies. They're like the big CEO that's running the show for himself.
Right.
There's many animal societies are like that. Ecosystems don't necessarily work well at the ecosystem level. There's all kinds of things which would amount to corruption and despotism as far as ecosystems are concerned. And so the biological examples that we want to emulate are actually quite special. Special evolutionary forces are required for them to evolve in nature. And that means that special cultural evolutionary forces are required for a firm or company to get these great advantages that we're talking about. And I mean, you've converged on a lot of the ingredients, at least by my reckoning. We do much of the same thing with pro-social, but at the end of the day, I think such things as how do you make people more flexible? How do you get them unstuck, which we've already talked about? How do we create small groups? How do we know that they're working? What's our target of selection? These boil down to the science end of things, which calls for such things as assessment and so on and so forth. And so I just wonder, and this also goes to Adam or anyone, Marcel, who does this. How sciencey do you get? How sciencey can you get? And this might be, I think, something that we can collaborate on so that when we do implementations, we get both the narrative end of things, do that well. In other words, we're inspiring and entertaining and so on. And at the same time, we are also doing a great job as far as on the science end of things.
Right. I work really hard on that. In fact, a lot of times you go, obviously, you know, when you're working with a scientific illiterate audience, it's very tempting to oversimplify and tell them what they want to hear. But I try really hard not to do that because that's not my primary interest is in the science, actually. So, you know, so it's interesting how that works. But I wanted to say that increasingly I'm looking for applicable tools. And so the pro-social is a great tool in these things of mediating actual human interactions on the ground. So when I do my workshops, a lot of it tends to be more applied. Like I try to buzz through this theoretical stuff to get them excited and get the narrative and the visuals and really get them thinking out of the box. But then when we get down into brass tacks, you know, of course it all comes down to human politics and transparency and trust and personality and all those kinds of things. So, and I tell them that, you know, we are not ants. we're apes, and so this is what's really going on. So, and because I have that human evolution background, I spend a lot of time on that as well. But I try to be as true to the science as possible. And you'll see in the book, I actually go into a lot of the math just for myself.
Right. Right. Donna, you've been adding text messages. Would you like to speak up?
Yeah, good morning. I just wanted to say that I find all of this fascinating. This book, Tamsin, is amazing. I love it so much. And all of this concept, you know, about how we can actually come together, this swarming concept, and this way of acting as superorganisms is so thrilling to me. And I keep bumping into this, how people are so into ego and power structure and how threatening that is. And every time that I'm bringing this up in whatever group that I'm in, I'm coming into all of this negativity and, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Having a senior moment here, sorry. But there's this wall almost, and it's being able to work at the team level seems to be so much more productive for me than trying to work, you know, like in a C-suite organization level or something like that. And my main interest at the moment, anyway, is working in my own tribe, which is the foreign assistance community, be that traditional development or humanitarian or disaster assistance. Mm-hmm. And the main problem in those teams really is management, you know, either coming from the team leader who has no team leader training, or coming from home office where there's either not enough management or too much, and then trying to counterbalance that. And what I'm finding in my work is that pro-social just opens all of that up for people. And at the team level in the field, they're freer to go ahead and implement things than they are in home office, for instance. So, I mean, this is just great. I'm just adoring this whole session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If I could break in, the idea of small teams, small modular teams, is definitely great. And I'm reminded of something called rapid results.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Have you? Who all here has heard of rapid results? I want to take a poll. Have you?
I have. And no, I don't want to speak on it, but I have.
That's awesome. But
I have the book. Let me put it that way.
Well, it's very much the case of having small modular teams being like the edge of evolution, working on kind of incremental problems and so on and so forth. So there's things. I mean, this is more convergence. So Mark Van Vogt on leadership, I mean, is very, very conciliant with what you're saying. The importance of a shared purpose, of course, that's the first core design principle of Eleanor Ostrom. So it just goes on, but it makes me. This is like convergent evolution. It's exactly what it is convergent cultural evolution. I'll bet there's dozens of people and organizations that have kind of converged on this, and each one has succeeded to a degree, but each one is also limited. I describe this as like the geographical distribution of a species. You know, a species originates, spreads on the basis of its success, but then comes up against boundaries beyond which it is unknown. And I think that's what we are. Each independent, quasi-independent convergence on this. When it makes me think that something more needs to be done in order to like get these things to coalesce in some sense, or maybe that's not necessary, but it's just something I think about a lot, that all of these convergent examples of people that have happened upon these great ideas, but they're still sort of limited in their own way.
They're still languishing in the ghetto here. I mean, the people of Regenesis have been doing this since the 60s, and they've done over 100 companies, and every single one has just exploded. They love it, and yet it hasn't spread that much. And the reason is just, I think, because of the instability and uncertainty. And of course, the people at the top are like, "Well, don't mess with me." So, you know, but what I found is by going in and giving these lunch and learns on the gee whiz stuff, you get these passionate people coming up to you afterwards, and they're like, how can we, you know, I hate my job, what can I do? And you know, a lot of it comes down to if they can find forums for sharing what their passions are, then these natural groups form. And then they can take on projects that are dear to them and become more engaged. And then at the same time, you get the buy-in from higher up to allow them to do that. And then you can slowly change the culture that way.
Well, actually, say more about that. Because how you get your foot in the door, you might not be invited in by the top to do the whole thing. You have a more, you just said that you have a more incremental way of doing that, but that's hugely interesting to me. Could you just say more about how you actually begin working with a company and how you actually, you know, get your foot in the door and then expand your influence?
Sure. Well, it's an easy sell. Everybody loves to have you come talk for an hour about this cool stuff. You know, usually they've heard about biomimicry and they want to know, you know, can we invent a tape like gecko feet or, you know, something like that. And so they just love it, and they're wrapped in, I mean, they just really eat it up. And then, you know, you say, well, that would never work at my company because, you know, I've tried cool stuff and I get shot down and a lot. And so, you know, we really focus on this individuals knowing what they're passionate about and connecting with others that are passionate about it. And if you can get a company intranet going, you know, then those groups can emerge. And then if you allow, then you want to start getting higher up buy-in of like, well, let's let teams pursue their own projects and as experiments, and they like an evolutionary experiment, they compete against each other, and pretty quickly it kind of trickles through the company if you get the right kind of company. And it seems to work really well. And then, so this is another interesting thing, like with Google, because they're my big client right now, is I did a lunch and learn. They got super excited about that. In fact, I did it on cybersecurity, biological models of security. And then they brought me into the real estate team to do biophilic design in their buildings. How would nature design a building, and how do you increase health and wellness by bringing nature into the building? And so that was a whole separate project, but in the process of that, I got in with the people development group, and they were like, we need to rearrange the way we work. And so they're catching on to that. So now they've created a whole new department, and they're hiring people that are biological liaisons. So, and I'm seeing companies that are actually hiring biologists because they want this perspective. So I think there is some kind of change going on. It's interesting.
Oh, that's great. That's really very insightful. Thank you. I've been speaking too much, so who wants to be next?
David, it's Adam again. I'll go if no one else will.
Sure.
But I don't want to you know, monopolize the time. Hey, I just Tamsin, there are several points from your presentation that I jotted down with which I'd love to follow up with you. I just wanted to make the point that I just want to encourage everyone to reach out to each other as you hear various things in all these presentations that resonate with you in some way. Gareth Craze and I had a really great conversation about a week ago or so, maybe a little bit more, as a follow-up to my presentation, and I'm already going to try to figure out how I can talk further with Tamsin. I think, David, to your point, there's enough similarity in some of the things that we're all doing, but what I've always found makes for a really interesting and productive conversation and even relationship is where you have this great balance of you know, homophily and heterophily. And I think having enough in common so that, you know, we have some common language and everything, and yet that we're coming at some of these issues from slightly different perspectives, I think can be tremendously helpful to each other as we elaborate and go into it a little bit more.
Yeah, we're that diverse group that Tamsin was calling for, and that you were calling for.
Yeah. Yes. So, you know, you've got your shared compelling purpose, your shared values, and then different perspectives and experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trust and cooperation. So it's the whole thing. Another major figure here is Victor Huang, who wrote a book called The Rainforest. Who's heard of him?
Yeah.
I appreciate you turning me on to it, David. I've really been enjoying it.
Yeah, I liked it too. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, it's making these same points. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. It's been really fun, and to see these people that, you know, you think, oh, businesses. And the other thing I'll say is people have such a high level of hopelessness, you know, and it seems like the smarter they are, the more hopeless they are. And so when I get done with this stuff, they go, oh, we could actually do this because, and I say, well, I know we can because other species are already doing it. It's doable. The math is there. It's just tapping into these things, which are really human nature anyway. I mean, that's the way we like to work. How do you deal
with the fact that so many businesses are like present oriented? They're just rushing to get things done the moment. They say they don't have any time to reflect, that sort of thing. Because this does require sort of stepping back and reflecting, and then working towards a fundamental change, not just your quarterly earnings statement.
Right. Well, so what we do is we ask for a self-selected core group of, you know, maybe 10 people. And then we just work with them. I mean, they are already interested and committed. And then we just do a series of really drilling down questions of like, what is the essence of your motivation, your passion, who you are, and then let's expand that to the company. What's the essence of the company, and what are you trying to do? And then we really focus on serving the customer, like putting yourself in the customer's shoes. What are their challenges and dreams? And so once the core team really explores that, then they start to automatically see, oh, our mechanisms are so machine-like here. You know, they start to see all the ways that the organization is structured to stop that. And then they start coming up with ideas and spreading it through the organization. And so that's really how we've done it. I try to let them do it themselves and just facilitate.
Yeah. Yet another book that I've recently read is called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, who was in charge of the armed forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And read that book, and you'll just see everything we've been talking about applied to the military adapting itself to war against Al-Qaeda. So you'll be amazed.
I'm actually keynoting with him at the end of the month.
Really?
Yeah, so maybe we'll have something to talk about.
So no, he has his own business consultancy now. He's retired from the Army, and he now has his own business consultancy. Just look up Team of Teams.
Okay, I will.
You'll see all of this playing itself out once again. Who wants the last word? I feel guilty. I've been talking so much.
Hi everyone. If no one else will speak, I might phrase this slightly clumsily. Tamsin, that was a really, really wonderful talk, and I can't wait to read the book. I was just wheeling back to what you and David were speaking about earlier about the metaphors, as David put it, that we bring in from science when it comes to the realm of business. I read a book a while ago where by a guy called Roger Masters, who I think is at Stanford. And he pointed out that traditionally, when we've used science metaphors in the realm of business, it's been in this way that he described as using Beatrix Potter type analogies. So that we would sort of like, you know, make these Peter Rabbit style inferences about business from nature. And obviously there's so much more depth to it in what you're doing and what we're all trying to get collectively achieve here. But I'm sort of wondering, when it comes to the diction involved in getting business people to think in evolutionary terms, how can we get them to see the real deep, challenging side of the science and not to merely look at this in these sort of like, as Masters puts it, these sort of Beatrix Potter-like terms?
Right. Well, actually, I spend a lot of time on that because the inclination, a lot of times, they do want those little cutesy metaphors, especially, you know, in their marketing teams and what have you. I mean, I'm even doing a project right now with a big design company, and they want me to come up with metaphors for women's caregiving, in like, you know, opossums or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's cute, but it's not systemic thinking at all. And why would you think that humans are going to act like opossums? I mean, it's cute, but that's about it. And so I really focused on getting them to think systemically, and then also getting them to understand that they're animals too. And so all these things apply equally to them, and to forget about Peter Rabbit and just start thinking of themselves as part of the coral reef, and the interrelationships they have with other players. It's really the system, it's the network, not the nodes.
Well, but there's a system that you also described with another metaphor. It's not Peter Rabbit anymore, it's a coral reef.
Yeah,
But
well,
that's
that's
still a
true. That is true. I mean,
But I think, but let's hear it. Let's tweet yours for metaphors. I think that that's the reason that this needs to be succeed at the narrative level.
yes,
And it
people
needs to
love a
succeed at the
story.
science level. And the metaphors are the narrative part. Acceptance and commitment therapy, part of pro-social, makes extensive use of metaphors, and so do all religions. So I think we need to have a rich metaphorical narrative that we're able then to link to the science, so that we're not actually, you know, departing from factual reality.
Yeah.
But so that's a little bit constraining, but not too constraining. So it's possible to tell a great story, make rich use of metaphors, and then for anyone who wants to press us, to back it up with the hard science. That to me is what we're striving for.
Yeah, and I really try super hard. I mean, honestly, David, when I wrote my book, I was like, I went through the whole thing going, now would people like David be okay with me saying this? You know, I mean, I care about that. That's really where I come from, is the I mean, if Bob Trivers is going to read this, will I be embarrassed?
Right. Right. Okay, well, we're a little 2 minutes over time, but that's because this has been so great. So anyhow, we're going to have another one 3 weeks from now, and I think this is really fulfilling the intent of the Business Action Group. I'm so excited for us all.
Good.
So,
also, I should say I have a lot of material, supplemental material. So if you want to email me, I have all kinds of little things that are supplemental to this.
awesome. Okay, and this is available for others who couldn't make it live. It'll be available online along with Adam's. So we'll develop an archive of these. Okay, folks, we'll see you later.
Thanks so much. So fun. Okay, bye-bye.